Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to another session from our series Quick Look. Today I will talk around debug logs, exception, error handling, all those things, how we can, manage those. What are the basic things that one should be aware of working with, any customization or any standard thing. And if at all there are any issues, errors, exceptions, what all places we should be looking at it, right? So basically, if we see around the pointers, right, those are mainly where to set debug logs. What if you are getting debug log full error, right? Different places where you can get the debug logs while you are having an integration with some other system. How to find out the debug logs? At times you won't be able to get those, right? Then if you are having a bad job, where to find the debug logs for that, right? In debug logs, right, we see the limits. So if you are not able to see the limits, how to resolve that? Where the logs are stored, how to debug, right? LWC. Then audit trail. What is the audit trail? How it can help us? What is the Apex exception email? How we can do monitoring for the exceptions, errors, right? And what is the login history? So we'll just touch base few of these points. I know there is a lot more, but these are the basic things that one should be aware. So say now always a question comes, right? If you are developed some functionality and if it is not working and there is no error on the UI because you have all the exception handling everything. Now even for development, while you are developing anything, you want to see like, okay, whether whatever I am expecting, is it working as expected? If not, then you need to do some analysis, some debugging. That's where the debug logs help. So basically in our Apex code, we always use that system dot debug, right? Whenever we are working with the Apex, we use system dot debug, right? And suppose if I go to developer console, I have some code, right? Wherever I am working, I can put system debugs, and when I execute the code, I'll be able to see the logs here. Yeah, this is the one place where you are able to see the logs. Now before you can see the logs, suppose in some cases you are not able to see any logs. What could be the reason, right? How to find it out? What are the places where you can see logs, where you can set the levels for log? So if you see here on the in I am in the developer console, right? If you go here in the debug, here is a place where you can set the log levels, right? You can create your own log level or you can choose the existing one. So if you click on add or change, you will see the different log levels that I have currently. And then here you can set the level: none, info, finest, right? None, error, warning. Oh, if I put only debug, it will only give me debug. So that's where these things play a vital role. On basis this, you will be able to see the different levels of logs. If in Apex, instead of finest, if you are putting only error, then in case of error only it will put something in the debug logs, otherwise you won't be able to see. So you need to go through this all details to understand what are the different levels which you need to set, right? Another important thing is the profiling. So there was one pointer where it says in debug logs we see this limits, right? So here you need to set that profiling to info. Only then you will be able to see the logs in the or limits in the debug log, right? So this is important. This is the one place. Another place where you can set the debug log level is you go to debug logs. So from UI you can go here and set the debug logs, right? And here you can specify from, so you can only specify for 24 hours, not more than that, because it's a huge amount of data, right? Every execution that you do, all those things will get captured in the debug logs for you to analyze if anything goes wrong, where the things are getting wrong, right? So here is the another place where you can set the debug logs. And here you can choose the user for whom you want to set the debug logs, whereas in the developer console it will always show for the logged in user. If you want to see for other users, you can do that as well. So if you uncheck this checkbox, show my current logs only, that time you will also see other logs as well, right? But generally we always set this as a best practice, we only see whatever we are debugging, right? Now these are the two places where you can set the debug logs. Now the another thing is, suppose you are working on something, right? You are doing some checks, codes, right? Every time you are doing something, see, a lot of debug logs are generated. For individual debug log also there is a limit, right? And there are three ways you can view this debug log. You can double click, open this debug log. You can right click on this. You can open raw log, right? And you can right click and download. So these are the three ways you can take a look at the debug log. The other thing which I was telling is the log size. Suppose a lot of transactions are happening in single your execution, right? That time it might generate a huge debug log. So it is always the best practices not to put system debugs, not to debug huge file contents and the things like that, right? Inside your code when you push the code to the production. So always best practice to avoid that thing, right? Unless it is very essential, you want to debug something really difficult in the production environment, or else you should be avoiding putting the system debug statements in the actual code which is live in production. Now here there is again a limit for maximum size, so after that it will just remove the additional lines, so you need to be mindful about that. Now where these debug logs are stored, sometimes what happens, the logs get full and it stop generating the debug logs. Now what you need to do, you need to go to this object apex log, right? This is where it store all the logs. And here you can select those logs whatever you want to delete, right? And then you can just delete those rows. So this is the simplest way to free up some of the memory in case you are facing that challenge. Somehow debug logs are not generated, right? Now you know both the things, why debug logs are not generated, why it is showing only specific things, why it is not showing limits, why it is showing limits. All those things are dependent on the settings that you do on the debug log levels, right? Depending on those settings you will be able to see different kinds of log levels, right? And here if you see, now profiling is info, that's where I am seeing all these limits. So this is also important while you are working on any task. Make sure that you always keep an eye on this one before making your changes and after making your changes. And also do a bulk testing to verify, right, we are not crossing the limit or increasing the queries with the number of records, right? Now the other thing is, now you must have set debugging, right, using your or exception handling using your custom object, right? Now how you can do that, monitoring on that. So whenever you are having your custom object, so in my case suppose I have error log object, right? And what I am doing, whenever there is a error in the code or exception in the code, I am explicitly handling that and inserting into this object, right? Now for this error sitting out here won't help, right? For a higher management, what you can do, you can create a report on this object and schedule it to send it to that architect or a delivery or the director, so that he is aware if there are any issues and that needs to be addressed, or a project manager who can keep eye on this and create a backlog stories, right, to resolve those issues. That is the importance of error logging and then monitoring on this one, right? Now what if some of the code went without adding any exception handling? So for that as well, Salesforce has provided one out of box thing which talks around apex exception email. So this will only send the email to this person. So whatever, if your technical architect is there, you can configure the email id, you can give comma separated multiple email ids. save it here, right? Verify if we can give multiple email address, okay, from the documentation, but I believe it can accept multiple email addresses. And then what happens, once you save this, if there is any exception that is happening in your code which is unhandled, right, say divided by zero error or null pointer exception, it will send that exception details to that email address which is specified here, so nothing will go unnoticed. This is very helpful feature, right? Now other thing I wanted to talk around is, say if you have a integration or if you have a batch job, so what best practice says is like always create a separate user, right? So whenever we have, say, batch job or integration, right? So what we need to do, we have to create a separate users to identify, okay, this record has been updated by the batch job user, or this record has been updated by the integration user or a data load user, right? If you are doing a data load, so it is better to have a separate users with the limited access permissions, right? Whatever they want to perform. Now when it comes to debugging this, right, so best way is, if you want to debug any of these things or any managed package code, you need to connect with the managed package team. But in this case, what we can do, we can just go to the UI level in the debug logs, and here you can select, okay, which, for which user I want to set the debug log. Set the debug logs for that 20-30 minutes where you are trying to do some use case analysis or testing in production or lower environment, and that's where here the logs will be generated, and you can download that logs and analysis, right? Even you can request the production team to set this debug logs and send those files across to you for further analysis, right? So that's how, if it is dependent on the user, you can always follow this route. Now there is one more thing regarding, if suppose a user is doing a login or some other stuff, if it is a integration user or anything, we want to verify whether he was able to log in or not. So you can always go back to the login history, okay, and you can even go back to the individual user to see the login history for a particular user, right? So that's where you can analyze, okay, whether the user is able to log in, or with the before login only he is facing some challenge, so it's not related to Salesforce, right? So that all things you can verify from login history. You can go to individual user as well, and there you can verify as well, okay, from the login history. Then we have something called uh, audit trail. So some of the things are stored here in the setup audit trail. Suppose somebody changed something on the class, or something changed on the some component, some configuration changes, so make sure you analyze what all changes you are able to see here. It will store up to last 6 months data, okay, and you can download it from here. It will show like, okay, which user logged in and what activity he has done. Still there are limited things, but that sometimes it is helpful. If suppose in production you are not able to analyze, okay, someone does something wrong with the configuration, right? If someone does something wrong with the record, right, we can always analyze using the history object. If history tracking is enabled, right, you can always go back to that. Suppose I have a history tracking enabled on one of my object, you can always go on the history object and analyze, okay, if there is anything which is changing, what is old value, new value, what time, who changed. So this is how I can analyze. So there are various ways for debugging, right? Debugging don't need to take in the only context of, okay, putting system debug. So debugging at various levels or investigating the issue as a holistic, right? So these are few things which are very essential that one should be aware of. Okay, I hope I have covered almost all the pointers. Okay, during integration not able to find logs because integration user might be different user and you are checking with your own user. Same goes to batch job, same goes to data load. Whatever user is doing that activity, we need to set log for that user only, so that we get the details. Okay, Hope this is helping. If there are any feedback suggestion, feel free to share those with me. This is specifically targeted for those who are already having knowledge of Salesforce and trying to have a quick look around the things, and hope this is helping. Thank you. We'll stop here.